Hello，大家好，又係我係 Agnes from Asia Bankers Club。咁首先好多謝大家抽時間過嚟聽我哋嘅 Zoom 啦，亦都好榮幸咧今日可以請到 HW Fisher。咁 HW Fisher 咧係一間其中一間喺英國最大嘅會計師樓。咁佢哋今日咧會同我哋講解一下咧成個英國嘅稅務，因為都知道好多移居啊，或者而家投資自住先，然後之後諗住過去自住嘅客人咧。去諗下英國啲稅務好似好繁複喎，咁我哋亦都請到HW Fisher 去講解一次有啲咩要注意啦。去到最後咧，亦都會有一個 Q&A section 嘅。咁其實最近咧，我都收到幾多 request 咧，啲客人問會唔會有啲倫敦松 4、松5、松6嘅選擇係 freehold 嘅物業咧？我終於揾到啦，因為平時咧喺倫敦係一個幾難揾 house 啦，第一亦都幾難。非常之難揾到 new build 嘅 house， 咁仲要呢一個係一個基質嘅 community， 即係只有你哋嘅住客先至可以入去呢一個屋苑咧，咁係真係幾難得㗎。咁今日我哋都會同大家分享一下啦。咁開始之前咧，介紹下我哋 Asia Bankers Club 先。Asia Bankers Club 咧，其實係 focus 喺一個我哋會着重於 physical assets 啦，即係一啲實體投資啦。咁所以可有物業咧係我哋一個最主要嘅業務啦。我哋嘅 CEO 係 Kingston， 佢咧之前一路都係喺投資銀行做啦，所以其實我哋一路咧都係幫我哋嘅客人去投資海外物業啦，無論東南亞或者英國啦。而 Kingston 咧自己都係喺 LSE 畢業啦，喺英國一間好出名嘅大學啦，所以佢本身自己咧喺英國都幾多 connection， 我哋揾到嘅樓盤亦都非常之多嘅。咁而喺佢哋每一次 launch 任何嘅新嘅樓盤啊，或者一啲投資嘅 insight 咧，我哋都會得到好多大型嘅媒體嘅注目嘅。咁介紹下自己先，我叫 Agnes 啦。咁可能好多觀眾今日都認識我啦，因為最近我哋都做咗好多呢啲唔同嘅 show 去講解一下英國有啲咩要注意啊、按揭啊嗰樣嘢。咁我係喺 Asia Bankers 嘅 director， 我比較 focus 喺咧英國嘅呢個 market 嘅。咁而我都幫咗好多英國嘅香港嘅客人啦，去順利買到佢哋心儀嘅 dream house 啦，同埋去settle 喺英國咁。咁所以有啲咩關於英國上嘅問題啊，甚至乎其實投資上嘅問題啊 ，feel free 揾我啦。咁我哋公司咧，其實除咗去揾到一個樓盤俾你之外咧，其實我哋做一站式嘅。我哋有一間公司叫做 ABC Property Solution， 都係 under 我哋 Asia Bankers Club 咧。咁我哋會 from 幫你揾到一個好嘅物業之後，成個程序去做到 transaction 啊，去到收樓啊，幫你驗樓啊，買家私啊，甚至乎有啲可能未必去住先嘅，可能我諗住租出去先嘅，我哋亦都有 letting 嘅 service 咧俾大家嘅。咁今次啦，亦都好開心啦，請到 HW Fisher 啦，佢哋都係我哋其中一個 partner 咧，去同大家講解啲稅項啦。咁所以如果 through 我哋 ABC 嘅客人咧，Asia Bankers Club 嘅客人咧，我哋其實好容易可以幫你安排到一個 free 嘅 tax consultation。咁所以揾翻我哋同事幫你去安排啦。好啦，咁我哋除咗啱啱講，可能今日講倫敦啦，其實我哋喺英國 coverage 咧都非常之多嘅。你見到呢一度咧，有 Manchester 啦、Birmingham 啦、倫敦有好多唔同嘅地方，我哋都會 cover 啦。咁譬如而家都多人去聽嘅，就係一個劍橋嘅地方啦，因為嗰邊校網又好啊，又安全啊。咁亦都我哋其實啱啱上2個星期啦，做咗 Access 啦，都係一個非常之多好學校同埋嗰邊有好多 job opportunity 嘅一個地區啦。咁所以如果有任何關於英國，可能有朋友住 Barnet 啊、Bristol 啊呢啲地方咧 ，feel free 揾我哋同事咧有好多唔同嘅選擇俾大家嘅。好啦，今日嘅 presentation 主要分3 part 啦。第一 part 同大家睇下樓啦，當然咁倫敦松5嘅 freehold 物業我哋真係非常之少，同埋呢一個屋苑得6間嘅啫。咁所以咧，我哋陣間會同大家睇下樓啊，睇下積啊，同埋咧去介紹下 Enfield 呢一個 town。咁第2 part 啦，會有一個 latest 嘅 update， 最新嘅 update for 呢個 UK 嘅稅務，會 HW Fisher 嘅姐出去同我哋簡介嘅。咁第3啦，就係大家最期待嘅 live Q&A 啦。大家 feel free 打你哋嘅問題喺個 chat box 度。咁你可以打自己嘅situation 啦，會唔會係用咩方法去買樓就最抵啦？甚至乎去到啲遺產稅點樣避啊 ？feel free 喺個 chat box 度，我哋盡量回答到就回答大家噶啦。又或者可以 text 我哋嘅聯絡你哋嘅同事啦，咁等佢咧可以快手啲去問到我哋，有即刻回答解答你嘅問題嘅。 好啦，咁我哋先介紹下 Enfield 呢個地方啦。Enfield 呢個地方咧，其實佢係非常之容易 access 翻出去倫敦 Zone 1嘅 location 喺倫敦嘅 Zone 5啦。你而家見到咧藍色正方形呢一個地區咧，就係我哋今日要介紹嘅樓盤啦。Exactly 咧嗰個地方就叫 Enfield Mill，就係嗰個樓盤嘅名啦。咁而 Enfield 咧其實係一個大 town 啦，咁而我哋亦都好近，講緊6分鐘行咧就已經行到去 Enfield Lock，就係嗰個 train station 啦。咁你見啦，22分鐘。你6分鐘行到去 Enfield Lock Train Station， 然後搭 train 22分鐘落翻去樓下咧，就會去到 Liverpool Street 噶啦。Liverpool Street 即係倫敦 Zone 1嘅地方啦，翻工啊買嘢其實都係喺呢個地方嘅。33分鐘咧有另一條線可以去翻 King Cross 啦。King Cross 大家好熟悉噶啦，Google 嘅 headquarter 喺嗰度啦。好多唔同嘅大公司亦都喺嗰度，所以咧其實而家咧都幾多喺倫敦做嘢嘅人咧，佢其實未必係住喺 Zone 1呢個 area 㗎，佢會住可能 Zone 4、Zone 5，揾一個容易啲 access，唔使轉車啊，一站就去到啊。咁呢一個地方咧就非常之適合大家去留意啦。咁亦都啦，如果可能去 Canary Wharf 翻工嘅，即係金絲雀碼頭嗰度嘅金融區咧 ，HSBC 啊一啲大嘅投資銀行啦，佢會喺 Canary Wharf 呢個地方咧39分鐘就已經去到啦。所以咧呢個地方咧係非常之容易 connect 嘅。好啦，咁俾大家睇啲相啦。金絲雀碼頭就係一個金融區啦，咁嗰度其實非常之多 tenant 嘅，咁亦都係其實好多未必會住喺公司隔離，好似香港咁，你喺中環翻工，你都未必住喺中環，所以佢咧呢一個Enfield 嘅 town 咧，其實都幾多客人咧，其實喺呢一個地方翻工，但係講緊30分鐘半個鐘到啦，就出翻去自己翻工嘅地方啦。咁點解我哋會介紹 Enfield 俾大家咧？因為 Enfield 咧本身係一個非常之 family oriented 嘅地方，係咩意思咧？佢嗰度有好好學校啦，有好多 green park 啦，好 spacious 啦，亦都係一個咧你唔需要揸車咧，有晒所有嘢嘅地方嘅。咁同大家睇睇一個佢個 background 啦，佢本身係一個非常之安全嘅地方，亦都係 family friendly 嘅。佢自己已經呢一個 town 咧，我哋嘅 postcode 咧有43間嘅學校咧係喺個 catchment area。你見咧大致上咧都係中學、小學 good 同埋outstanding 都有㗎，仲有咧，其實佢出咗名咧，係一個喺倫敦 Borough 入邊係一個幾多 green space 嘅 area 嘅。咁好啦，佢除咗啱啱話好多 green space 之外啦，其實佢自己呢一個 Enfield Town 咧係一個非常之好嘅 connection 嘅。你見啦，我哋其實行路呢個人仔嘅咧就係我哋樓盤嘅 area 啦，講緊7分鐘行翻去 Enfield Lock 嗰個train station 啦。咁你見 train station 咧一路 connect 出去咧，其實你講緊好短嘅時間，22分鐘出翻 Liverpool， 22分鐘去翻 Stratford， 即係東倫敦嗰邊嗰度有間大學啦，可能有機會家長們啊，有小朋友嚟緊會去翻出去倫敦讀大學嘅話咧，呢一個樓盤其實非常之好嘅，因為你又會有一個比較 spacious 嘅地方啦，仲要係 gated community 啦，咁所以咧呢個地方係值得留意嘅。仲有啦，佢揸車其實咧都去到好多唔同嘅 city 㗎，譬如劍橋啦、Barnet 啦，呢一個地方亦都係非常之 connected 嘅。咁變咗，如果你有啲朋友去喺嗰邊住啊，你住呢度，其實你去探朋友其實都一個幾方便嘅 location 嘅。啱啱講啦，呢一個Enfield 咧，其實佢係非常之出名，好多 parks 嘅，佢係超過120個 parks 啊。有排大家行啊，咁佢有好多 water park 啊，有啲係 green park 啊，咁其實 park 咧喺英國嚟講咧係一個都幾奢侈嘅地方，即係倫敦啊，咁所以咧喺倫敦嘅話，如果你話倫敦 Zone 1，我哋會去 Regent Park 啦，我哋會去 Hyde Park 啦，但係都係得呢兩個嘅啫，即係呢一比較多人去嘅地方。之前我自己成日去倫敦嘅時候咧，我見啲人真係當 park 係沙灘咁樣，着晒 bikini 去曬太陽啊，或者帶啲小朋友去跑啊、放電啊各樣嘢啦。咁所以呢個地方咧，你唔需要擔心話要出翻去邊度去揾公園，呢度唔使嘅。亦都啦，呢一度咧係都幾多有錢人會特登嚟呢一個地方咧去打 golf 嘅，因為佢呢度咧出咗名係最多 golf 級，有7個 golf course 喺呢一個 area。咁呢度其中一個啦，咁你見其實係非常 spacious 啦。如果大家係有打 golf 嘅興趣咧，咁其實呢個地方都幾啱大家㗎。亦都啦，除咗你話出翻去好方便之外咧，其實自己 Enfield Lock 呢個 area 咧，其實好多生活嘅配套㗎啦，有 park 有 dining 有 leisure， 所以你唔需要擔心話我使唔使揸車，其實全部行路都行到晒去㗎啦。食嘢啊、買嘢啊、cinema 啊各樣嘢，其實呢個度都已經係 有晒所有配套啦。咁而長遠嚟講咧，其實呢個亦都係一個幾好嘅投資價值嘅，因為其實 Crossrail 2咧都喺呢一度 Enfield Lot 有一個站㗎。咁所以咧，你講緊如果我諗住我嚟投資住先嘅，未諗住過去，其實呢一個樓盤咧嘅升值潛能係非常非常之睇好嘅，因為佢 Crossrail 咧 exactly 喺 Enfield Lot 呢個我哋6分鐘行到，所以將來咧你6分鐘行到咧就已經去到 Crossrail 嘅站㗎啦。好啦，咁同大家介紹下 Enfield Mills 呢個樓盤啦。個 postcode 咧就係EN3 6AG 呢個樓盤啦。Completion day 咧其實今年年中已經可以收樓㗎啦。咁所以如果有啲客想 ready 想做按揭啊，或者諗住而家就可以去咧，已經係 ready， 同埋佢 total 得6間嘅啫。咁而六間嘅 house 咧全部3房啦，咁所以咧大家咧中意嘅話咧，其實你好多客就會先揀咗單邊嘅選擇先嘅。咁你見佢嗰個花園咧，其實最細嗰個 plot 咧都有成差唔多500尺㗎。好啦，而 location 上啦，你見啱啱講啦。EN3 6AG 呢個 location 講緊6分鐘就行到去 Enfield Lot， 呢一度就係俾你去任何地方都非常之方便㗎啦。所以咧，你唔需要話我要揸車啊嗰樣嘢，但係咧呢一度亦都包車位㗎嚇。仲有啲咩咁好咧？因為本身喺倫敦，首先你要揾到 freehold 又要新，又要係呢啲 modern 嘅 design 係非常之難。你見佢嘅 design 咧，唔係一般嗰啲紅磚屋㗎，佢係一啲 modern 嘅 design，可能好似香港嘅別墅嘅design 啦。咁亦都佢係 gated 嘅，咩意思咧？即係只有你個屋苑嘅先至可以入嚟。你入嚟嘅時候要拍卡啊嗰樣嘢，咁有閘有成嘅，係非常非常之安全。因為我都幾多客問我house 會唔會有啲gated嘅選擇咧？其實我哋都揾咗好耐，終於揾到俾大家啦。咁所以 total 咧係得6間嘅啫。有興趣咧，快啲聯絡我哋嘅同事攞多啲資料啦。咁呢一個咧就係佢個 area 啦。你見佢咧其實個有 car park 嘅 area 啦，佢有自己嘅 house 啦。你見 house 咧其實得6間嘅啫。咁你見有啲花園大啲啦，可以去到900幾尺啦，有啲花園去到400幾尺啦。咁我自己最中意呢一個樓盤嘅地方咧，除咗啱啱話係gated之外咧，佢亦都有個21,500嘅尺嘅 common area 咧，俾大家去跑步啊，俾小朋友啊，呢一個都係 private 㗎嚇，其他人入得嚟㗎。佢哋見係非常之 spacious，係自己屋苑嘅人先至可以用嘅啫。俾啲相俾大家望下啦，非常之靚啦！你 BBQ 啊，各樣嘢喺自己呢一個地方有個游泳池啊 ，outdoor cinema 完全冇問題嘅。咁俾啲 design exterior 俾大家睇啦。而呢個係佢入邊嘅其中一個 showroom 啦。你見咧，其實佢都係一個 full 包裝修嘅狀態啦。咁佢入場嘅電器都係包嘅。好靚啊！因為其實喺英國咧都係比較多啲傳統啲嘅 design 嘅，即係可能紅磚啊、尖頂啊。呢一度咧係一個比較 modern，即係現代化少少嘅 design 啦，係一個好 grand 嘅選擇嚟嘅。咁而佢亦都係一個 fully finished condition 啊，咩意思咧？即係佢其實基本上入場嘅電器咧就已經包晒㗎啦。同大家睇下啲積啦，咁呢個其中一間 house 係單邊啦 ，house one 啦，咁同大家行下啦。呢一個咧就係個門口一入嚟啦，咁亦都係一個 storage room 俾大家擺下鞋啊，擺下遮架啊，因為嗰邊英國天氣會凍咧，或者會落雨咧，咁好多時候會有啲大褸咧，我哋都會擺喺 storage room 呢度嘅。咁入到嚟咧，側邊會有一間房啦，你哋可以用嚟做房又得，我嚟做書房又得。咁入到再行入啲啦，咁就有一個好大嘅廳啦，咁個廳就有個開放式廚房啦。咁行翻落去咧，就會有自己嘅 courtyard啦。佢前面呢度就鋪咗磚嘅，咁變咗咧，其實我都幾多客中意係鋪磚呢一種嘅，因為前面可以 BBQ 啊各樣嘢啦。咁而去到呢邊咧，就會係一個 paved area 咧，一個大嘅綠色花園啦。好啦，咁我哋上去上一層啦，全部都係2層嘅做，所以佢咧每一個面積咧都會大啲嘅。呢一間屋咧就991尺啦，咁所以咧大約一層就500尺左右啦。花園咧呢個就506尺啦。好啦，我哋上到去2樓啦，上到2樓咧又會有一個 guest toilet 啦，會有間房咧，同埋都係有間雜物嘅 area 啦。咁而 master bedroom 咧就會係喺2樓啦，套廁有連埋套房嘅選擇啦。咁你見佢啲窗咧都非常之大㗎。呢一間guest room 咧，其實你見佢有成2邊窗嘅，咁所以咧呢一度咧講緊單邊嘅選擇咧，呢個其實幾唔錯嘅。 好啦，最後我用翻3個原因啦，去總結一下 Enfield Mills 呢個樓盤同埋呢個地方啦。咁首先咧，第一喺倫敦要揾到新嘅 house 呢一種咁現代化嘅 design，仲要係 freehold 嘅 house 咧，講緊74萬磅已經揾到咧，其實真係好難得嘅。因為74萬磅，大家如果知道咧，可能喺松4，我 even 唔係講松1啊，可能松4嘅 location 咧。apartment 都係最多買到2房嘅啫，咁佢仲要唔係一個 freehold 嘅選擇啦。咁呢一個咧，呢一個價錢喺倫敦要揾到3房2層，然後有埋車位咧，其實都真係幾難得嘅。而第二啦，呢一個地方咧，其實佢嗰個 connectivity 係非常之高嘅，因為最近其實好多觀眾啦，佢會睇一啲松5、松4嘅 area 咧，其實都唔一定講緊咁容易去 access 嘅，因為大家都係喺松5嘅時候咧，就會好睇佢嗰個站有冇一條 direct line、direct train 嘅 station 會係直接出翻去倫敦松1，而 Enfield呢一個地方咧 ，Enfield Lock 我哋7分鐘行到去個站咧，就正正有一個 direct train 咧，可以出翻倫敦嘅 Liverpool Street， 22分鐘已經去到倫敦松1啦。咁所以咧，佢自己呢一個 area 嚟講啦，出翻去倫敦又好，去其他地方 Heathrow Barnet 劍橋揸車去到呢啲地方，亦都係非常之方便嘅。咁所以呢一個喺松5嘅選擇嚟講咧，佢真係幾難得會有個咁好嘅 connection 嘅。第三，亦都係我最中意嘅一個elements 啦，佢係一個 gated 嘅 community， 因為要喺倫敦 even 你講緊 apartment 係咪真係全部都 gated， 亦都係唔係一定㗎。我哋有啲樓盤講緊都唔係大家都可以去嗰啲 park area 㗎嘛。咁但係呢一個地方你見有成21,500尺嘅common area、common courtyard 俾大家自己嘅 residence。你見呢一個地方只係得6間屋啫嘛，所以咧佢21,500俾6個 family 去 share 咧，其實係一個非常之空曠嘅地方啦，自己又可以喺自己個 area 唔使驚其他人會入咗嚟我哋呢一個 community 咧，係真係都幾難揾到嘅。所以咧 gated 嘅 area 咧，我係覺得一定要 share 俾大家睇嘅。咁好啦，今日我哋嘅分享就係咁多啦。咁如果大家想攞多少資料咧，記住揾翻我哋嘅同事啦。咁我而家將個時間咧交翻俾 HW Fisher 去講解下英國稅務嗰 part。好 ，Thank you 謝叔 for introducing the UK tax part. Thank you.
Thanks, Agnes, and thanks for having me here today to talk about UK property tax. Firstly, very quickly to introduce about us. I'm Jisoo from HW Fisher. We established in 1933 a top 25 UK accountancy firm based in central London. We have 30 partners, about 280 staff, and we are specialized in advising UK and foreign property investors. We act over for 1,200 clients in Asia, and we also have a dedicated department advising overseas landlords with bilingual services. We also work with a large number of funds and family offices delivering bespoke tax advice and structuring. So today I'm going to cover income tax, corporation tax on the rental profit, or capital gains tax on when you dispose of property, inheritance tax, annual tax on enveloped dwellings, as well as stamp duty land tax. So on this slide, you can see there's a brief overview of exposures on income tax, corporation tax, capital gains, inheritance tax, and stamp duty land tax. So there's no real difference between a UK investors or overseas investors who invest in residential property in the UK, apart from the 2% non-resident surcharge introduced in April 2021. So the UK government is not trying to penalize the overseas investors, it's more trying to align the tax for overseas investors with the UK taxpayers. Firstly, income tax. Individuals and trustees need to pay income tax on rental profit arising from UK properties. And the current income tax rate is 20% 40 and 45%. It depends on your overall income of the year. New landlords need to register with UK tax authorities to obtain a UK tax reference number in order to file their tax return. They need to notify within 6 months of the end of the UK tax year to the tax authorities and then to report their tax before the 31st of January following the UK tax year. A UK tax year runs from the 6th of April to the following year of 5th of April. Late notification will incur tax-geared penalties. So if your property has completed, we recommend to register non-resident landlord scheme to avoid withholding tax on rental income, because your estate agent has the obligation to withhold 20% of tax on your rental income and pass over to the UK tax authorities. If you registered with the non-resident landlord scheme, and this can avoid that 20% of tax being collected at source. There's a tax-free personal allowance of 12,570 each year, and it depends on whether you are entitled to personal allowance. It depends on your nationality and your passport holder status. It depends on the double tax treaty between UK and the territory. So if you are UK national or a national from EEA, or if you're a tax resident in the UK, you will be entitled to UK personal allowance. But if you are BNO passport holder, I'm afraid you are not entitled to the personal allowance. And this 12,570 will be frozen until April 2026. Corporation tax. Companies need to pay corporation tax rather than income as individuals. Corporation tax current rate is 19%, and the filing and payment rules are different. So corporation tax returns need to be filed within 12 months of the accounting year end of that company, and tax payments needs to be paid within 9 months and 1 day after the year end, unless it's a large company. The companies need to apply the new tax reference number, and they need to file a corporation tax return. When we file the corporation tax return, we have to prepare a profit and loss account and the balance sheet to attach together with corporation tax return following the UK accounting rules and using a specific format. The corporation tax rate will be set to rise in 2023 April, and the rate will be 25% for large companies. So if the company with profit under 50,000, the corporation tax rate will remain at 19%. So if the property is above 250,000, the company needs to pay tax at 25%. The profits between 50,000 to 250,000, a taper rate between 19% and 25% will apply. So if a company is in a group, or the company has associated company, when we're assessing the profit, we need to look at all the company's profit as a whole and aggregate in order to assess the profit and to determine which corporation tax rate to apply. How rental profits are calculated? Firstly, when we work out because you pay in tax on the profit, so there are certain expenses can be deducted. So for financing cost, such as mortgage interest, can be claimed, but there's restrictions for individuals and trustees. There's no restrictions for companies or commercial properties if the interest expenses is less than 2 million. Other expenses can be deducted also include agents' commissions, professional fees, include the agent agent commissions, and accountancy fees like our fees, repairs and renewals, not initial costs. Any repair and maintenance costs can be claimed. So if you start renting out a property and this is the first time you buying the furniture for the property, the first time the cost of the furniture that cannot be deducted. However, going forward, if you are replacing any furniture within the property of the property business, it can be deducted. Other running costs include insurance, water rates, service charge, ground rent, cleaning and general maintenance, travel, provided those costs are wholly exclusively for the property business and they all can be deducted. So on this slide, I'm going to walk you through with an example of how the finance cost restriction applies to individual or trustees. A single individual with no entitlement to personal allowance receives gross rent of 60,000, has expenses of 5,000, pays mortgage interest of 30,000. So you can see the net economic profit is 25,000 after paying expenses and mortgage interest. So when we start working out the tax liabilities, we start with the rental income, which is 60,000. Deduct the cost of the expenses, 5,000. As you can see here, there's no mortgage interest can be deducted. So the total profit is 55,000. Then we apply the tax rate. And for the first 37,500, which falls within the basic rate band, will be taxed at 20%. That gives you the tax liability of 7,500. So any remaining profit will be taxed at higher rate, 40%. That gives you a 7,000 tax liability. The total tax due is 14,500. So if you look at here, so you can claim a 20% tax credit against the 30,000 of mortgage interest. That gives you £6,000 tax credit to set off against your total tax. So your net tax liability is actually 8,500. The effective rate of the tax is 34%. Moving on to capital gains tax. When you sell a property, you need to consider capital gains tax. The capital gains tax is charged on direct disposals of residential or commercial property or indirect disposals of property-rich entities. So direct disposals is when you owns a residential property under your personal name or your own name directly, or if you hold any shares in a company that holds property in the UK. Property-rich entities means at the point of the disposal, more than 75% of the asset is derived from the UK land, that's a property-rich entities. Because those rules are only introduced in April 2015 or April 2019 for the indirect disposals. So any gains prior for the direct disposal, any gains prior to April 2015 is not taxable. And for indirect disposals of commercial properties, any gains prior to 2019 is not taxed. So there are two methods for you to work out the capital gains tax. You can either use the rebasing method or time apportionment, which we can look after for you. Individuals and trustees must notify the HMRC, the tax authorities, file a tax return and pay any tax due within 60 days after the completion. So there's a tax-free annual exemptions of 12,300 for each individual. So this is different to the personal allowance. So each individual will be entitled to a tax-free allowance of 12,300, and this will be frozen until 2026. The CGT, capital gains tax rate, will remain at 18% or 28% for residential property. It depends on the overall income of the year. Moving on to inheritance tax. The current rate is 40%. Inheritance tax is a death tax and only applies to the net asset at the date of the death And we also need to look back 7 years to see if there's any gift that you gave away, and in order to calculate the inheritance tax. So generally speaking, a UK domiciled individual are liable to UK inheritance tax on their worldwide asset. So for non-UK domiciled individuals, is liable to UK inheritance tax on UK residential property asset only. So by domicile, we generally, broadly speaking, means where is your permanent home is. So for most of our audience today, probably you are domiciled in Hong Kong. So it's likely just the UK residential property asset will be liable to UK inheritance tax. So what are the residential property assets? Is UK residential property directly held by yourself under your personal name, or if you own any shares in the company that owns UK residential properties, or any shares of partnership owning UK residential property, non-bank loan or collateral to fund a purchase. So for instance, a non-bank loan, if an individual made a loan to their family to facilitate them to make a purchase of the UK residential property, and that loan will be potentially liable to UK inheritance tax. Also, if you sell a shares that in the company that owns UK residential property, the sale proceeds from that disposal will remain within the inheritance tax net for 2 years. So there's a handover period for 2 years if you sell a share in a company that holds UK investment properties. How to mitigate inheritance tax? Each individual has a tax-free allowance of 325,000, and transfers between spouses can be tax-free. If the asset is your main residence and estate is worth less than 2 million, so there's an additional tax-free allowance of 175,000 in addition to that 325,000. So in total, you can entitled to 500,000 tax-free allowance. So any debt taken out at the point of purchase can reduce the value exposed to inheritance tax, but there's restrictions on refinancing. So any debt, including mortgage, that you taken out at the outset of the purchase can reduce the value of the asset that exposed to inheritance tax. Because when we work out the inheritance tax, we use your net equity of that asset. So if your property, let's say, was 1 million and you have a loan of 500,000, so the net asset is 500,000. And then each individual has a tax-free allowance of 325,000. So your exposure to inheritance tax will be only 175,000. There's restrictions on refinancing. So if you use the loan to repurchase any other properties to invest, like in your property business, because your exposure to the inheritance tax remains the same, so this still will reduce the value exposed to inheritance tax. We recommend to have a will in place because without a will, your estate will be passed on to by following the UK intestacy rules. The standard intestacy rules will be 50% of your asset will go to your spouse and 50% will go to your children. Further on, so you can consider to gift the asset as early as possible, provided if you survive for 7 years from the date of the gift, you are likely to mitigate the whole inheritance tax, so there's no tax to pay, provided if you don't enjoy any benefit from the property, such as you're not living from the property, living in the property and like taking the fruit of the property, because that's not a proper gift. You can also consider to take the life insurance to cover inheritance tax. Finally, we would recommend to consider how long you will be exposed to inheritance tax, because inheritance tax can disappear overnight. If you sell the property, let's say in the just for a short-term investment, and you decided to sell the property, and your inheritance tax exposure will disappear as soon as you sell the property, because you don't own any UK residential asset in the UK anymore. Moving on to annual tax on enveloped dwellings, ATAD. So this is a tax applied to small or family companies that owns UK residential property worth more than 500,000. And there's an annual charge applied if this property is made available for and occupied by the shareholder, director of their family members. So there are two taxes needs to be considered in here. Firstly is the stamp duty land tax. There's a flat rate, 15% will be charged on purchase. Also, there's an annual charge between 3,700 to 237,400. This is the current rate and will be charged annually and depends on the property value. There are exemptions. If you are the property developer, it will be exempt, or if you rent the property out to a third party. But those exemptions are not automatic. You must file an annual tax return by the 30th of April each year and make a claim in that tax return. Otherwise, late filing penalties or late payment penalties will arise. Moving on to stamp duty land tax. Overseas buyers are now liable to 2% non-resident surcharge, which applied from the 1st of April 2021. Because the rule was introduced on the 11th of March 2020, so there are two key days that we need to look at before we consider whether the 2% surcharge applies or not. So the first one is exchange date, and we need to look at the completion date as well. So if you look at this slide, the second row, so if the contract's exchange date is before 11th of March 2020, but completed after the 1st of April 2021, today or going forward, so the 2% surcharge will not apply. This because the government still wants to protect those overseas investors who made the commitment to make the purchase before the 11th of March 2020. The next relevant one is the if the contract exchanged after the 11th of March 2020, but completed after completed today, then the 2% surcharge will apply. On this slide, you can see it gives you a picture of different stamp duty land tax rate based on different scenarios. So if you look at the first column, so this applies to the UK resident when they purchase the first property, and the rate will vary from 0% to 12%. So this is the basic rate. And moving on to the next column is UK resident who purchased second property, or a UK resident company purchasing the residential property, and the rate runs from 3% to 15%. When non-resident purchase the first property, so the 2% non-resident surcharge will apply, and the rate runs from the 2% to 14%. Moving on to the last column is the non-resident when they purchase the second property, or a non-resident company purchase the residential property. So the rate runs from the 5% to 17%. So as you can see, the rates are different, depends on the situations. Other ways to reduce stamp duty land tax. So if you purchase more than one residential property from a single transaction or a linked transaction, you can use multiple dwelling relief to average out the cost of the property and apply to the relevant stamp duty land tax rate, and then multiply by the number of properties to work out the stamp duty land tax. So this is more beneficial if you have if you purchased a high value property and a low value property, so you can average out the cost of the property and try to maintain within the lower rate band to achieve the tax benefit. So when you purchase more than 6 properties in a single transaction, so the non-residential rates will apply automatically. The maximum rate for non-residential rate is 5%. So lastly, because the UK government has passed a new act, which on the 14th of March 2022, and then introduced the Register of Overseas Entities. The rules apply to the overseas persons who invest in UK land and properties. This covers the overseas company or a partnership or other similar legal entity. Also includes individual who is the beneficial owner of an overseas entity. So by beneficial owner, we mean a person can be beneficial owner if they hold more than 25% of the shares of the company, or if they can control the company. So the companies needs to register their beneficial owner with the Companies House by 14th of September 2022. These rules apply retrospectively to the property bought up to 20 years ago. So even if you dispose the property, the company disposed the property between 28th of February 2022 to 14th of September 2022, they still need to register with the Companies House by the same date, which is 14th September 2022. So failure to comply will constitute a criminal offense. So this is a quite important rule that recently introduced. I think today I've covered all the taxes that are around the property tax in the UK. So I'm willing to take any questions later on. Thank you.